Hey, welcome back.
We're
It's Matt
back.
Roush.
You're missing between here. Hey, it's Mike Brennan.
And we're back with another segment of the M Squared TechCast. And we have with us today, as we do every week these days, our very own epidemiology expert, infectious disease expert, Fred Brown. And Fred, there's several things I want to ask you about this week. But first of all, I guess, what do you think is the most interesting thing going on in the pandemic this week?
Well, the thing we're all most worried about are the variants, and we talked a little bit about that last week, and I have a little bit more to say about them this week, and I'll give you some clinical results from the trials we've got going. But that's the most worrisome thing I've got going right now. Most interesting thing is just seeing, I'll show you some interesting new data. I'll see what you guys think is most interesting. I have some new data for you guys, so you can see.
Okay.
All right, fire away.
Oh, you want to see? So what do you? Matt had some questions though. So go
ahead, man. What are your other questions?
Well, I just basically wanted to know where we are in terms of testing for these new variants, and what do we do to improve that? Because I heard some very disturbing numbers in terms of how few of the people getting tested are getting tested for one of these new strains. It's a really minuscule number.
Yeah, so our current tests do detect the new strains, but we're having some challenges and especially the tests look for three different kinds of proteins. The ones that are in the are called nuclear proteins that are part of the virus, the ones that are membrane proteins, and the ones that are spike proteins. And because the spike protein has mutated so much, there are some PCR tests right now that can't detect this the new variant from South Africa and the new variant from Brazil. And that's very concerning, because you've got to have 2 out of 3 positives in order to get a true positive. And what we could be seeing is, because now we are missing 1 out of the 3 on some of these tests, we could be getting a lot more false negatives, which means you guys think that you are that everything's wonderful, but in fact you've come down with the variant. And the way we really want to get a hold of this is to start to do a lot more genetic sequence testing of all the positive results, so that we can identify when things are mutating and how fast they're going. We don't do that, as you know. We only did about 0.28% of all positive test results, so that's not very good. 0.28% is minuscule, as you point out.
So when people get the vaccine, and which is not designed or wasn't designed for these variants, if they get the variant, does it minimize the impact of the variant? I know this is kind of convoluted, but I think you understand that, right?
Let me show you. I have some of that data right here. I went through it last night, and because people were asking me about it quite a bit, and if you like, I can show you what that looks like. Here are all the approved and approvable vaccines that are going to come to our market in the next few months. And you can see on one axis, we've got the variants, and those are, so wild type, that's the original Wuhan that we created the vaccine for. And that was all genetically sequenced around January 10th. And then we very rapidly created the spike protein isolate. And we said, we want to just manufacture this protein. And based on that Wuhan spike protein, we now have all these vaccines. And it's literally every vaccine, every medicine that we've got, antibody medicine that we have, is focused on that particular spike protein. The B1 the B1.1.7 British variant, that's the one that is super reproducible. So we're seeing that, and we've had about 400 cases of that already in California that we've detected. And as Matt pointed out, you can only detect it if you've done a genetic sequence for it. So because we probably have a lot more than that. State of Michigan probably has about 50. We're not sure the exact count. I know of at least 20 we had at last count, and that was last week. So we're probably closer to 50, and that's known. And then we're going to be off the charts if we really started to measure this stuff really rapidly. And you can see that against the wild type or against the original, if you go across it, Moderna, 95%, 94.1% effective, and more importantly, the severe cases, you don't have any severe cases, you take that vaccine. Pfizer, if you take the vaccine, 94.8% overall effectiveness, and again, 88.9 against severe. Here's J&J's new release data. They haven't given us the full data set, so I'm always hesitant to talk about this, but you know, we will be getting that. They've unblinded the data set. Everyone has a chance at J&J and the review team to look at this at the FDA. They'll be publishing that analysis in about a week to 2 weeks. I hope that it's about 10 days, 15 days. And then we'll be getting a copy. And then, so maybe next week or the week after, I'll be able to tell you exactly what it is. Overall, 66% against the wild type. But remember, this only had one shot. Pfizer Moderna vaccine were showing similar effectiveness also after one shot. For moderate disease, 72% effectiveness, severe disease, 85% effective. So you're not likely to get a severe case if you take this one shot. AstraZeneca, 70.2% overall effectiveness. Severe, they didn't have any severe cases in the people who got vaccinated. And Novavex, even better, 89.3% with severe cases being 100% stopped. So you can see we're really good against that one wild type, the original Wuhan virus. That's the original. And the variants, you can see that on the B1.1.7 variant, it's the same. Great news, it reproduces faster, so it's a lot fitter virus. It can reproduce with you know, much less vaccine, viral shedding to you. It grabs you more, and so you need much less of it to make you infected, and it also tends to make you cough up a lot more. So it's a double effect. You cough up more of it when you get sick with this variant, and it's much more transmittable and links to you much more solidly than the Wuhan one does. So you need less of it. So that's a double whammy. About 70% more higher, what they call R0, or reproductive rate. And you can see all the way across where we're good with that particular variant. And that's good because it's in the United States right now, especially in Michigan right now. Then we've got the Brazilian variant. The Brazilian variant is the one we're most worried about. It has the most mutation, has 23 major mutations, and no one's reporting on what their results are. But we know a few things that make me very concerned. First of all, these guys probably do know what the results are, and they're not really ready to tell us yet. And they're also trying to make vaccines especially for this variant. Because they know what the results are. So Moderna announced they're going to try to make a vaccine just for this variant. And they can do that in one of two ways. One, they can try to create a third booster for you. So if you've had the 2 Moderna shots, they'll create another booster just for this variant. Or they could go to a point where they call multivalent. That's my area of expertise, multivalent vaccines, where you have more than one antigen in the same vaccine, and that way with one shot you're getting antigens for both simultaneously instead of having to do it sequentially. You can see AstraZeneca did do some reporting of this and their overall effectiveness went from 70% to 64%, so a decrease in the effectiveness. What worries me is that Sinovac, CanSino had a big project going on with their vaccine. It's not reported very much because it's not been reviewed yet, and it isn't going to be available in the United States probably because we'll have different and better vaccines. But for that particular vaccine, they had a 65% effectiveness rate reported coming out of Indonesia and a 50% effectiveness rate coming out of Brazil. That means that's a significant drop. When the drop gets that big, we actually create a new vaccine in the case of a flu. So that's where we're worried that we're starting to get to the threshold of having to create actually a new vaccine. And now, luckily, we've got the technology to do that relatively rapidly. We think we can probably turn that around, depending on the regulations. You got to get the regulations right. We think we can turn that around in about 5 months. And have a booster or a special vaccine just for that variant available. We won't have multivalent that rapidly, but at least we'll have something that's for it specifically. Novavax also did not report results. And then we have the South African variant, and this is also a concerning one because we saw I showed you last week the brand new data sets that showed 10 times neutralization decrease, and there's 6.4% reduction in binding. So what that means is our immune system works in 2 ways. The first way, the first thing it does is it tries to find stuff that's foreign and glom onto it and say, hey, come on over here, there's a foreign thing over here, and they try to beat it up. And that's step one, and that is the antibody binding, right? So when it has a 6.4 times reduction in antibody binding, that's not good because that means more of the virus is reaching your cells. The next thing that has to happen is once it gets into the cell and starts to infect the cell, your body has a second response. That's a T and C cell response, and it comes and blows up those cells. It purposely kills them. Which is right. So those are the two, and that's the neutralization antibodies. So that's 10 times lower. So not only can't you fight off the virus before it gets to the cell, but after it gets to the cell, you can't blow it up, which means that it continues to reproduce and infect you. So we're very concerned about those numbers, and that typically is on the edge of having to say we might have to develop something special. So you can see that overall, J&J went from 66% overall effectiveness to 57% effectiveness. Again, that's a pretty significant drop, almost an 18% drop. And then AstraZeneca did not report the results separately. They combined all these tests and said, well, we put all of it together, and South Africa's in there somewhere, but we can't see it. And Novavex, this was really so shocking. Novavex, which is a slightly different technology, uses different protein particles to vaccinate. It went from 89% effectiveness to 49% effectiveness.
Yeah.
That's a shocker. Now, it still prevented 100% severe disease, which is what we're really interested in, but that's a real shocker. So, and they did report separately, and that's the one that's everyone looking at going, holy cow, that could be a problem.
Yeah.
Given that everyone else is sort of funny about reporting what's going on with these variants, right?
The typical flu vaccine, I've heard many people, I don't know if you've addressed it, but I've heard other people address it, is not very particularly effective, right? I mean, I get my flu shot every year. Sometimes I still get the flu. So, I mean, that's down in the 20 or 30% effective range, isn't it? Something like that. It's
40 to, well, we like to say it's 40 to 60% effective. It's been around 45% effective.
Okay.
For if you look over the past 20 years, and we had a couple of really bad years where it was only down the 10% effectiveness rate, which is unacceptable, obviously. That was early 2000s, and we just misguessed which strains would be most prevalent, and so we didn't choose the right ones. We're getting better at that now on a global basis. I can show you some of that data next time. I just have to run through a whole bunch of slides in order to. I have all the data, but I wasn't ready to talk about the flu today. But we can do that maybe next week.
Sure. Now, the situation that's going to arise, though, when old people like me and Matt finally get scheduled for our vaccines, we're not going to have a choice. They're just going to give us what they have, right?
I think we're probably going to go to a one-shot strategy. I pointed out that the break-even for the one-shot strategy in terms of saving lives, I thought we would save about 20,000 extra lives if we went to a one-shot strategy over the next 3 months. And that's not to say we're going to have just one shot, but it means we're going to come back a little bit later than we would otherwise for that second shot. It'll probably be 12, maybe, instead of 4 weeks, it might be 12 weeks, but in that range. And that the reason for that is that we are really going to have a trouble with these variants. These variants, if we look like the UK does right now, I showed you that data. It showed basically they locked everything in, and then despite locking everything in, nothing happened. And they're going door to door now doing tests. That's in London. And outside London, and that's like Essex and Surrey counties. So those are the big, the big counties outside of London. They're going door to door and saying, swab please, because they want to find out how prevalent this thing is, what they're up against. And I think we're going to be in Southern California and Florida real quick.
Yeah, pretty scary.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, we have some of that UK variant here in Washington County. I don't know how many cases, but I've seen it come through in some reports.
Yeah, it's about 20 cases right now.
Okay.
Unofficially. Now what's interesting is I've been working with the country of Israel, and Israel has been vaccinating a lot. And so we wanted to find out whether there's any effect. And there's some good initial data. Now it's not perfect, but here's data from last night. I didn't get a chance to put it up and make it nice. But what we had was 2 big surges through Israel. One went through a few months ago, and then we locked down. And you can see that what happened when we had the big surge, the second wave is that blue wave. That's the blue part. And that was really before we had vaccinated anyone. The vaccines weren't really available yet. They're just starting to roll out. And you can see what happened. It was 12. This is the population over 60. And the reason we want to look at the population over 60 is because we actually, on the third wave, We've had 3 waves now. On the 3rd wave, we actually had vaccinated the people over 60. So you wanted to see the difference between what would happen in the population over 60 when they weren't vaccinated and when they were vaccinated. And look at the blue line. The blue line shows that we had about 12% of the population, and it dropped down. Then we locked in that solid line is when that black line is where we locked in. And then you can see, despite the lock-in, the population of a percentage of new cases over in the 60 populations, because they're largely more, they're largely in more settled, they're less likely to distance. They're all together in nursing homes and apartment buildings and so on. That's the elderly population in Israel. And you can see that the thing just takes off, that blue line. Now, a few months ago, we had another wave. And at that point, we'd vaccinated a lot of the population. Over half of the population was vaccinated by the point of that dotted line. And you can see that instead, so we were pretty much parallel, right? 14 dropping down to about 12, the 12 dropping down to about 10. Very parallel lines, right? Everything looks about the same. But the vaccinated population this time, it keeps going down. It doesn't take off again. And that is significant, I think. And you can see that the difference in that in the first few days, it's a 30% drop in the rate of people when you've gotten vaccination, when when you've been vaccinated, you're 30% less likely in those first few days of a bad upswing. You're 30% less likely to become ill. So that's a good sign, right? You'd much rather be on that yellow curve than on that blue curve, right? If you're over 60. Well, right now it's gone down to 7%. 7% this morning. So we were happy about that. It shows, and these are all Pfizer vaccines. They're on the Pfizer, they're on the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. But you can see that in populations now, we're starting to be able to see the effect of a vaccine. So that's cool. There are a couple things about the vaccine that we want to talk about that I want to make sure people knew. And that is, you have to know how to optimize your vaccine response, right? Because when you guys get it, you don't want to have a suboptimal response. You want to have a great response. And there are a couple of things that we found out, basically. The first is, if you're trying to get an immune response and get that immune response strong, you don't want to be taking ibuprofen or acetaminophen, because that actually reduces your immune response and reduces the learning of your immune system. So I know you're going to feel pain, fatigue, kind of not so great after this. If it's about pain, use ice packs. Don't use ibuprofen or acetaminophen. Otherwise, you won't have as good a response as possible. And we've seen this several times, especially the flu vaccine, and we're seeing this now in the COVID vaccine with people who were in a group that took ibuprofen, because they felt badly afterwards, and those who didn't, and we saw a much better immune boost with those who did not take the ibuprofen or acetaminophen afterwards. So that just came out, and it's just sort of basic vaccinology, but it's important to do. If you want to take things that would enhance your immune response, omega 3s will do that. Vitamin D3s will do that. Vitamin C, vitamin B12 complex will do that. So there are some things you can take. People likely melatonin will help you with that. So there are some medicines you can take to actually boost your immune response, but not acetaminophen and ibuprofen.
How about bourbon?
Well, I was going to say, does whiskey mitigate the pain? I'm on board with that.
Yeah.
So
far, does that have an effect one way or the other? Or just make it,
the effects of alcohol
make it all feel
numbing.
better.
They're numbing and probably helpful. Okay. Just for a day or two, though. Nothing. You might have an even worse hangover on day 3 or 4 than you otherwise would have, though.
All right, gotcha.
Of course, you want to have a good night's sleep. Get some exercise the day before. Probably, go out walking with your dog or something. That means 15, 20 minutes to get your heart rate up a little bit. Avoid stress. Stress actually depresses the immune system.
Avoid stress. Okay.
There you go.
My life
a pandemic
stress.
and a depression. Yeah, that's
Other than everything's perfect. Yeah, that's how you avoid. Yeah, that's the WC Field's cure to insomnia is to get plenty of sleep. That's the only.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, those are some things. If you are taking your vaccine, lucky enough to get on the list, this is how you really optimize your response. In the meantime, you want to make sure that you use an N95 mask. These new variants are too tough for your cotton masks. The cotton masks are about 3 times less effective than a surgical mask, and a surgical mask is about 30% less effective than an N95 mask. So you get a sense that it's about 4 times better to use an N95 mask, and the technology makes a difference. What you want to look for is a NIOSH certification on your mask. And so, sadly, a lot of manufacturers have forged this, but there are some other clues. You can go to the CDC website, and they'll actually show you all of the NIOSH fake masks. And then NIOSH has a list of all the masks that they've actually approved on their website. But basically, there are a couple of big red flags. On it. It'll actually have a NIOSH approval number right on all the masks and the labeling. And you can actually go and look at NIOSH's equipment list, the cell list they've got, and they'll tell you and confirm that you've got the right one. And there's some links here that people can look at NIOSH trusted source page.
What I've discovered though, Fred, unless you're a healthcare or a first responder, they won't sell you an N95 mask. Yes, so I was forced to buy the KN95, which is the Chinese knockoff.
Yeah, that's
I don't know if it's as effective, but that's the only thing and yeah, had my physical last week, and even my doctor wasn't able to get N95 masks, so.
Okay, so I was able to without any problem, but I may have just been lucky. I don't know, or knew who to go to and things like that. I'll ask my source about that. I wasn't aware that people were having trouble with it, but I know that they're pretty easy to get fake ones. And here are some things that you want to make sure that they aren't fake. As I said, everything will have a number on it. Everything will be marked NIOSH, and it won't be decorated with stuff at all. And
plain white, right?
Yeah, white or blue, and it'll include white, and it'll include the NIOSH number on the strap, and the straps that go around your ear. Big red flag. That's not going to be solid enough. Make sure you fit them right though. And if they're uncomfortable, then wear a surgical mask instead of a cotton mask if you can get it. Apparently, I guess those are both also difficult to get, but as I said, I haven't had any trouble yet myself. So let me know about that. If people have trouble, let me know. I can get you some contacts. So at any rate, we were talking last week about a few things, right? We talked about the fact that production was sort of different. We talked about the kind of the 3 or 4 factors that were causing us to have trouble getting the vaccines out. And right now we're running at about 1.5 million vaccines a day. Pretty good, up from where we were just in a month. But to give you a sense of this, right now Michigan has inoculated about 1 million people. If we were running at Israel's rate, we would have inoculated 5 million people, about 4.5 million people. So you can get a sense of just how much more aggressive some of these other countries are than what we're able to be. So we talked about why that was. And the first thing we said was manufacturing's hard. Second thing we said was distribution's hard. And then after we get it to the people at the distribution site, it turns out that convincing people to take this miracle, I mean, it really is a miracle, is also hard. There's a good segment of the population that doesn't want to take the vaccine for one reason or the other. I'm not sure why not. It's an adult vaccine. It's not. I know people have some issues with vaccinating some of the children. They've had they've had some reports of that they're concerned about that. Those reports haven't been borne out with the scientific data, but people have concerns anecdotally. With COVID, we do not have any of those concerns. I mean, we're talking about the chance of you having an allergic reaction, just an allergic reaction, your chance of you dying is about 1 in 50 million so far. Chance of you having an allergic reaction is about 1 in a million. Maybe between 1 and 10 in a million, depending. And those people who have gotten allergies, 71% of those knew in advance they're going to have an allergy, and the remaining 29%. Were largely allergic to polyethylene glycol, PEG. And so if you want to really, avoid that, take some Benadryl in advance. If you think you're going to have an allergic reaction, bring your EpiPen, because the only people who are having big allergic reactions are people who have known allergies. If you've got a PEG, if you've got a polyethylene glycol allergy, the way you'd know that is if you have trouble preparing for your colonoscopy exams. Turns out polyethylene glycol is the happy stuff that you have to take before you take your colonoscopy. so, so that runs
None
right
of those are happy anywhere in that. So,
So if you've had an allergic reaction to that stuff, you
Yeah.
may want to talk to your doctor about. Other than that, we have not found anything that would cause anybody to have any questions about whether the risk rewards are offset. You got a 1 in 900 chance of dying of COVID in the United States right now.
wow.
I mean, and this is versus a 1 in a million chance of even having an allergic reaction, and a 1 in 50 million chance of possibly dying. So we're talking about that kind of offset as far as rewards go versus the risk. However, there is a large population who is just naturally resistant, and here's what we're finding. It's just sort of a knee-jerk reaction for some reason. It's not scientific. I just told you what the data is. So if we start with a slideshow here, I'll just show you some of the results. And what we're finding is that we need to get to about originally we thought an 82% overall vaccination rate, plus people who've been sick rate. So the overall immunology, being protected of 82%. That's what we thought our number was. With these new variants, it's likely to be 90%. 90% of us have to have be immune from the virus in order to stop it. And by stopping it, I mean that enough of us are there to avoid it bouncing off somebody and hitting somebody who's susceptible. So if enough of us are there blocking the virus, eventually it can't find any hosts. That has to be 90%. So 1 in 10 of us can still be unvaccinated, and we'll still be pretty safe and not have to worry about outbreaks. But if we go to 2 in 10, 3 in 10, we're going to have outbreaks, and that's the problem. And the problem as you have outbreaks is, as we saw, you have a larger gene pool and more variants occur, and that suddenly makes your vaccines less effective. So we're so if you suddenly move your vaccination effectiveness from 90% to 50%, all of a sudden, even you vaccinate everybody, you can't get enough people. Vaccinated to protect the rest of us.
I see two issues there. One, there's a lot of anti-vaxxers out there. I don't know what the percentage is.
I can tell you on this chart.
And two, I think it's also unfortunately turned into a political issue.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people who are Trump supporters think all this is all hogwash anyway, it's all made up. So achieving 90% may be problematic.
Well, that's what we're worried about, right? So it's the number is vaccine effectiveness stopping transmission, which we found out now may be going down a little bit, times the percent of inoculated, plus the recovered as a percent of the population. That is the level of control you've got. And when we know the R0 is probably 1.15, then the overall herd immunity has to be more than 55%. And in truth, it'll have to be as it moves, because these new variants are much more transmissible. So 70% more transmissible. So all of a sudden, your herd immunity levels go up. So we've got a double whammy. Our vaccines are less effective, and it's more transmissible. So our herd immunity levels actually have to be bigger. And so you can see the numbers in the little yellow box. The vaccine hesitant, we've labeled them. The anti-vaxxers are about 9% of the population. So 9% of the population off the bat is not going to take the vaccine. We can't convince them. They are convinced the vaccines are, for some reason, not the right thing for them. And so we're already, even if we inoculate everybody who's not an anti-vaxxer, we're just going to be at the border of being protected. And then we've got a whole bunch of people, as you point out, who are angry disbelievers. Those are the people who, as you point out, don't believe it's real. And those are about 20% of the population right now. They just don't believe that COVID's that problematic. It's sort of like the flu. It'll go away. I'm not sure how they got this idea, because It sure hasn't. You know,
I do. It's called Fox News, but go ahead. So,
well, we should. I don't recommend watching that. Fox
no.
that they're spreading that. I can't believe they can't. That they you know. I mean, it's pretty obvious that we've got a problem with COVID.
Yeah.
So that'd be hard to offset with any news. Then we have the cultural resistors, and those are people who are that's the black community who have been in the past badly discriminated against, right? They've had the Tuskegee experiment. They've had cells taken from them and created brand new fabulous drugs and haven't been compensated appropriately. They've had all sorts of things that have been sort of where people have lost their trust in the medical community, and for a good reason. So that's 15% of the community. And then there are skeptical laggards, and those are people who say, well, you know, I can be convinced, but I want to see the data first, and let's have my cousin's aunt take the first one, and then I'll decide how she does, and that, you know, but slowly but surely we'll get there. And basically, I think that is about 20% of the population. So overall, you know, we're looking at over 50% of the population who are going to need some push. Now, the skeptical laggards, I think, are convincible. And slowly but surely, we're watching that I'm willing to take a vaccine move from, you know, kind of 50% where it was to closer to 70%. But now I think we're going to start to have some real slowdown. I think once you get to 70%, getting from 70 to 80, that's going to be pretty hard. 80 to 90 is going to be almost impossible, and over 90 is really impossible, just because of what people's positions are. And part of the problem, like, is the anti-vax movement. And I think we're going to lose the battle, the social media battle that we have that's coming up to fight. And you can see that there's some real big things. These people, first, there's quite a bit of money to be made in being an anti-vaxxer. It turns out you can sell alternatives to vaccines. You know, they haven't been through the FDA process, they haven't really been tested very well, but an alternative, you know, like take the special vitamin I just developed, it'll make you feel better and probably help you avoid the viral transmission or something, you know, flunky like that. That isn't really a claim, but sounds good. The FDA really can't police. And of course, they sell books, you know, and they sell services and food supplements and courses. And then they complain the pharmaceutical industry is making all sorts of money on people who are taking vaccines. So it's sort of an interesting dichotomy to watch, you know, the whole thing, since they're largely unregulated, do whatever they like. The message that there are is that vaccines are dangerous to your health. Now, because they can't really demonstrate that with COVID, what they've done is that they've moved that to, I have a right to say what I want. So if you talk to an anti-vaxxer today, they won't really say, well, it's dangerous, because they have no basis for that. They'll say, well, I can say what I want. And they say, yes, you can, but why would you want to spread, you know, false information like that? And the answer goes back to, well, there's some money in it for people, and there's a happy community that's doing quite well with this. Thank you very much. And that there's lots of natural alternatives. So unfortunately, when you go to the internet sites today and you say, you know, I'm worried about my new child just been born, what kind of good nutrition can I get? And if you click childhood nutrition, which is a good thing to click and figure out more about, if you're a brand new mother, for example, you will guaranteed have an invitation to visit a new site called Why Vaccines Will Kill Your Child, which have no basis in reality, but are attached to these other sites that are promoting relatively good practice. And that's very disappointing to see. And it's something that the people who are creating these sites don't do naturally, but it's something that the search engines do because it promotes more views, right? As soon as, oh my God, I want to kill my child. What else? What I want to find out more about that. And you get sucked in to these false claims that aren't regulated. And that's a real shame. And you can see that basically there's going to be a fight, and the fight is for the middle. And this is what things looked like in 2019, late 2019, if you actually took a view of everything that was followed through in terms of the vaccination community. There's the blues who think the vaccines are great, and then there are the reds who are anti-vaxxers. And then there's the green who don't really know, right? And you can see that the green are the biggest number. The anti-vaxxers are, if I had to look at this and say, my guess is the undecideds were about 60%, the anti-vaxxers were about 30%, and the pro-vaxxers were 20%. Now, the pro-vaxxers, those are largely scientists, you know, who are saying, you know, you should take the vaccine because we've done all the science, and they're sort of in their little silos, and they're thinking that science will overcome all things eventually, and the numbers will speak for themselves. The anti-vaxxers, though, basically move at their own rate. They can invent, new conspiracy theory and falsehoods as fast as you like, and as many as you like. They are looking kind of for people who are interested in vaccinations. And unlike the vaccination guys who are basically looking for new NIH grants, these guys are actually looking for people who can be convinced. And so if you're an undecided and you want to hit refresh every once in a while to find out what's new, there's not much going to be happening on the scientific side. I mean, science happens at, when I did vaccines, it took me 15 years to develop some MITech vaccines. So, I can't compete with the anti-vaxxer side. So they're going to hit the refresh and they're going to say, oh my goodness, there's more stuff about this. Look at this, It turns out you can grow a second head if you take a vaccine, or X, Y, and Z happened in outer Slobovia. Isn't that interesting? And so you'll have a lot more information about the anti-vax side of the equation than you will the vaccination side. And if you look at that quote up on top, 2/3 of the time when a user joins an extremist group on Facebook, it's because Facebook's algorithms recommend it. So what Facebook and Reddit and YouTube and Twitter and Medium all have done is they've looked at this huge amount of volume of data and said, we can help you with that. We'll create algorithms that will help steer you toward the right information that you are most interested in. But the quote unquote right information for Facebook and YouTube are those sequence of clicks that keep you on their media longer. It's not the sequence of clicks that give you the information fastest and best. It's not one that takes you to experts. It's not one that takes you to vetted information. It's one that takes you to memes that are clever and are popular, not to an expert. And of course, my website, suffers from that. But so I'm slightly biased, but I can tell you that doing this myself for a while, you're going to get a compelling and very interesting meme that keeps you in their environment a lot longer, much more likely than you would get an expert view. And you can get a sense that what the pro-vaccinators need to do in order to do this is doing what we're doing. We're trying to pre-bunk some of this, right? Especially around safety and efficacy and why things went so fast and why it's such a great opportunity. We have to counter and start to instill confidence. Right now, it's easy to find onesie-twosie anecdotes about some 90-year-old man who was on his deathbed, took the vaccine, and 3 days later died. Well, that has nothing to do with the vaccine. We have not been able to find any correlation between an increased death rate and taking a vaccine. And I think if it was, it wouldn't be on the market. The FDA would take it off. So that's why we're going to lose this social media battle. We're not going to win it. It's impossible. Well, we can't win it because it's not a playing field that we compete in, and it's not one that we're interested in. Unfortunately, most people get their news today. 50% of people get the news today from these social platforms and not from a respected expert.
Traditional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.